Life had always been simple, predictable. I remember the first time I saw Ava. She was in a crowded coffee shop, holding a book with one hand and stirring her coffee with the other, her bright green eyes glimmering as she laughed at something a friend said. Her energy, her presence, it was magnetic. I knew without a doubt that she was someone I wanted in my life. We met in college. I was the kind of guy who focused on my studies, knew where I was headed, and didn't let anything distract me. But Ava was different. She was fun, spontaneous, full of life. She made me feel like the world had more to offer than just numbers and spreadsheets. By the time we graduated, I knew that I was going to marry her, and I did. 3 months after college, Ava and I tied the knot. It felt like the perfect decision, the kind of decision everyone dreams of making. We moved into a cozy home in Portland, Oregon, a place that felt like it was ours. We made plans for the future, the kind of future that involved kids, love, and growing old together. Ethan and Lily came into our lives 2 years later, and I couldn't have been prouder to call myself their father. I built my career as a small business owner, specializing in financial consulting. It wasn't glamorous, but it was fulfilling. I wasn't rich, but I made a good living. Ava, ever the supportive wife, loved the life we were building together. We upgraded our house, taking on more responsibilities, but we didn't mind. We were a team. But as time went on, something started to change in Ava. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Maybe it was her increased irritability, the way she snapped at the kids over the smallest things. Maybe it was her distance, her lack of interest in what had once been our favorite activities. It was hard to tell. Life had a way of distracting me. There was always something, work, school events, errands, that kept me too busy to notice the cracks starting to form in our relationship. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Ava sat me down. Her eyes were distant, like she wasn't really looking at me. "I'm just not happy, Ryan," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "I feel trapped. I need more. I need to live. I want to travel. I want something different." I remember the ache in my chest, the confusion. I didn't understand. This wasn't the woman I married. This wasn't the person who told me she wanted the same life, the same dreams. But there she was, a stranger to me. I told her we could go to therapy. We could work on it. But she refused. "I'm not crazy, Ryan. I don't need therapy," she snapped, her voice sharp, defensive. The conversation ended as quickly as it began, with her retreating to the bedroom and me sitting alone, trying to make sense of the words she had just spoken. The days after that conversation were filled with tension. I could feel it in every exchange, every glance. Ava seemed more withdrawn, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I tried to be patient. I tried to give her space, but inside I felt like I was losing her. The woman I had married, the woman I had trusted with my heart, was slipping away, and I had no idea how to stop it. Then came New Year's Eve. We had always spent New Year's quietly, just the 4 of us, with the kids and a bottle of wine. But that year, Ava insisted we go to the company party. She claimed she wanted to dance, something she'd never been interested in before. Reluctantly, I agreed. At the party, everything felt wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Ava seemed distant, her attention elsewhere. And then I saw him, Kyle Anderson, my boss, a man I respected and trusted. I'd known him for years, but tonight everything about him felt different. Ava and Kyle danced together. At first it seemed harmless, but then they kept dancing, song after song, until it was clear they weren't just dancing. They were connecting. It was in the way they moved together, in the way they laughed, the way they looked at each other. My stomach twisted, and I felt something dark rise in my chest. I tried to approach them, to bring Ava back to me, but she pulled away. She told me she was tired, but when Kyle returned, she eagerly danced with him again. I watched, paralyzed, as they shared a kiss just before midnight. My heart stopped. The room around me disappeared. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. I stormed over to them, fury coursing through my veins. "Leave my wife alone," I shouted at Kyle, pushing him away. But he didn't fight back. Instead, he smirked as if he already knew that this was a battle I couldn't win. Ava, looking embarrassed but resolute, turned to me. "I'm going with him, Ryan," she said, her voice cold. Just tonight. We'll talk tomorrow." I couldn't comprehend her words. I watched, helpless, as she took Kyle's hand and left with him. The humiliation, the anger, the heartbreak, it all crashed down on me in that moment. My world shattered. The days after New Year's Eve were a blur. The humdrum of daily life carried on as if nothing had happened, but I could feel it, the weight of that kiss, that betrayal, pressing on my chest. Ava's absence felt sharper, more obvious now. It was as though I was living with a stranger, someone who was only pretending to be my wife. I tried to convince myself it was a fluke. That night, those moments, maybe it was just the alcohol, maybe I was overreacting. But then the subtle changes started to become undeniable. The way Ava avoided eye contact, how she'd disappear for hours at a time without an explanation. It wasn't just the late nights at work anymore. She was slipping away, and I couldn't grasp her. I thought it was just a rough patch. People go through them, right? But it felt different. I knew her better than anyone. I knew when something was wrong. I could feel it in the way she breathed beside me in bed, in the way she walked around the house like a ghost. She wasn't really here, and I was slowly being consumed by the growing uncertainty in my gut. One evening, I walked into the kitchen to find Ava staring out of the window, her back to me. Her phone, as always, was in her hand, but this time she was typing something with a sense of urgency that caught my attention. She didn't hear me come in, and when she finally turned, there was an expression of panic in her eyes. She quickly slid the phone into her pocket, her fingers trembling. "Who were you texting?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I wasn't texting anyone," she replied too quickly, her words a little too sharp. "Just checking work emails." I knew she was lying. Her eyes wouldn't meet mine, and there was a tightness in her voice that made my skin crawl. I tried to act casual, like everything was fine, but something was wrong. The doubt gnawed at me, relentless. The next few days only amplified the feeling that Ava was hiding something. She started taking longer showers, locking herself in the bathroom for far too long. I found a note once, tucked under the edge of the kitchen counter. It was from her, written in a hurried, disjointed hand, with no signature. It simply said, "I miss you. It's harder than I thought." I didn't need to see who it was addressed to. I knew. The name didn't matter. The weight of those words crushed me. I started to lose track of time, of my own thoughts. The more I thought about it, the more I felt like I was drowning in my own insecurity. Every little thing Ava did, every small movement became a potential clue to something much bigger than I was ready to face. I couldn't stop the questions from flooding my mind. Was this really happening? Was she really leaving me? One night I came home from work early, unexpectedly. As I opened the door, I heard voices coming from the living room. Ava was on the phone. It was a conversation that sounded so wrong. The tone of her voice, the way she laughed, like a secret they were sharing. It felt foreign, not like her at all. I stood frozen in the doorway, listening to her words. "I don't know how much longer I can do this," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I can't keep pretending." My heart dropped. I didn't need to hear more. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, and none of them pointed back to me. My instincts screamed that I was losing her. My wife, the woman I had known for years, was gone. I wanted to storm into the room, demand answers, confront her, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I turned quietly and walked out the back door, leaving her to finish her conversation, not knowing I had heard everything. I didn't know where to go from there. I was caught between the need to confront her and the terror of what I might hear next. I spent that night alone, pacing, the darkness around me mirroring the emptiness inside. Ava was slipping further and further away, and I was powerless to stop it. The anger, the fear, and the heartbreak swirled together in a hurricane of emotions, but the worst part was that I was losing hope. I was losing faith in the woman I had loved, the woman who had promised to be with me through thick and thin. The next morning I woke up early, unsure of what I was supposed to do next. Ava had already gone to work. She was always busy, always too tired to talk. The emptiness in the house seemed to echo back at me. I grabbed my phone, staring at the number for a lawyer I had saved months ago, just in case. I wasn't ready to make that call, but I knew I would soon. This was no longer about fixing our marriage. It was about saving myself from a life I didn't recognize, a life where everything I thought I knew was nothing more than an illusion. I had to make decisions. But the truth, the painful truth, was that I didn't know how. I don't know why I kept looking for answers, even when I already had enough to know something was wrong. Maybe I was hoping I'd find some shred of innocence in Ava, some tiny piece of her that would explain everything away. But deep down, I knew the truth was far worse than I could ever imagine. It started with the little things. Her phone buzzing constantly with texts she never let me see, her sudden urgency when she'd grab it and quickly walk out of the room. I told myself it was nothing. She worked with a lot of clients, some of them needing her attention outside of office hours. But after that night, after hearing her on the phone talking to someone like she was sharing a secret, it didn't take much to connect the dots. I could feel the air in our house grow thicker, like something heavy was pressing down on me, suffocating me. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I had to know. I had to know if the man I called my wife had truly turned into someone I didn't recognize. One day, as she stepped out to pick up the kids from school, I stood in the hallway, frozen. My eyes darted toward the drawer in the kitchen where Ava kept her phone, along with a few other personal things. It was locked. I'd never asked her for the code before. We'd always trusted each other, or so I thought. But now I had a feeling she was hiding something, and for the first time in our marriage, I was about to cross a line. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly approached the drawer. My fingers shook, the key to her privacy now in my hand. I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall as though it were counting down to my next move. I opened the drawer, and there it was, the phone. No text messages were open, no immediate signs of what I feared, but something inside me screamed that this was it. This was the moment I'd been dreading, and yet I couldn't stop myself. I swiped the phone open, and a flood of messages hit me like a slap across the face. My breath caught in my throat, and I almost dropped it. There, in clear text, were the words I had tried so desperately not to imagine. "I miss you so much, Kyle. Can't wait to see you tonight." It wasn't just a one-off message. There were dozens of them, lines of messages, all between Ava and Kyle. Kyle Anderson, my boss. My stomach churned, and I felt a cold sweat form at the back of my neck. How long had this been going on? How had I been so blind? I scrolled further, the words blurring together as I read through every message. They spoke of stolen moments, shared laughter, late-night calls, and promises of secret rendezvous. This wasn't just a fling. This was something deeper. This was betrayal. I sank to my knees, the weight of it all crushing me. I had been so sure, so confident that I was doing everything right, that I was providing for my family, being the husband she wanted. I thought I was enough, but I wasn't. And then, I saw the pictures of them together, smiling, laughing, holding hands in places I'd never seen. Each image felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. The betrayal was not just emotional, it was personal. Kyle, my colleague, the man I trusted with my career, was now the one who had taken my place in her life. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone across the room, to do anything to release the fury that boiled inside me. But I couldn't. I was numb. A part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, to tear the mask off and demand answers. But another part of me, a part I hated, wanted to ignore it, to pretend I hadn't seen anything, to keep living the lie because at least it was familiar. But how could I live with this? How could I share a life with someone who had so openly destroyed everything we built together? I shoved the phone back into the drawer and closed it as if somehow hiding it again would erase the pain it had caused. But it didn't. It couldn't. The discovery was there, burning into my mind, and I couldn't escape it. I tried to push it all down, to pretend it didn't matter, but it did. And I knew what I had to do next. The decisions that lay ahead were the hardest I'd ever face, but I was no longer blind. I had seen the truth, and now it was time to face it, no matter how much it tore me apart. The days after discovering the truth felt like I was walking through a fog. Everything around me seemed distant, blurred, unreal. I had the proof now. The texts, the photos, the late-night phone calls. I had caught Ava and Kyle, and yet there was still a part of me that couldn't fully accept it. couldn't believe that the life I had spent years building with Ava had crumbled in an instant. I tried to push the images of those photos out of my mind. I tried to ignore the conversations that replayed in my head like a broken record. But every time I saw her, every time she brushed past me in the house, I could feel the weight of it. I couldn't escape it. The truth was suffocating. It was late afternoon when I saw her again, standing by the door, keys in hand. Ava was supposed to be picking up the kids, but she was distracted, scrolling through her phone. Something inside me snapped. "I need to talk to you," I said, the words slipping out before I even realized it. I watched her stiffen, her eyes darting away from me. She knew, of course, that I knew. There was no way I could hide the storm brewing inside me. "Ryan, I don't think now is the right time," Ava began, her voice faltering as she tried to step around me. "No, now is the perfect time," I interrupted, stepping in front of her. My heart raced, my hands trembling as the anger surged through me. "You've been lying to me for months, Ava. I know everything." Her eyes widened, and for a brief moment I saw genuine panic in her expression. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The silence between us was thick, filled with the weight of everything unsaid. "I know about you and Kyle," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The words felt foreign, like I was hearing them for the first time myself. "I have the messages, the pictures, everything." I watched her face pale. The color drained from her cheeks as her shoulders slumped, the fight leaving her. For a moment it was as if the woman I had once known was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. You don't understand," Ava said weakly, her voice cracking as she finally met my gaze. "I never meant for it to happen. It just did." I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how much she had hurt me, how much she had broken everything I had believed in. But instead, I just stood there, the words caught in my throat. I felt cold, detached, like I was watching this moment unfold from outside my body. I had been living in denial for so long, convinced that I could fix things, that maybe Ava would come back to me. But the truth was staring me in the face, and it was uglier than I could have ever imagined. "I don't even know who you are anymore," I said, the pain in my chest almost unbearable. "How could you do this to us? To me, to our kids?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't move. She didn't try to reach for me, didn't even speak. And that silence, God, that silence, hurt more than anything she could have said. "Ryan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen, but it's over. It's too late to fix it." I shook my head, the reality of what she was saying crashing down on me. It was over. She had made her choice, and it wasn't me. I didn't know how to respond, didn't know what to say. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, and for a moment I felt like I couldn't breathe. How had it come to this? How had I let myself get so lost in this relationship, this marriage, that I hadn't seen the signs sooner? But there was no time for self-pity now. The pain of the betrayal was too fresh, too raw, and all I could think about was how I would protect the kids from the fallout, how I would rebuild the life that had been destroyed. Ava's tears continued to fall, but I could no longer find it in myself to comfort her. The woman who had once been my everything, the woman who had promised to stand by me forever, was now a stranger, and nothing she said could change that. I turned away from her, feeling the weight of the years we had spent together pulling at my chest. It hurt more than I had ever imagined it could, but I knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back. I walked to the door, my mind racing. I couldn't stay here any longer. I needed to get out, to breathe, to think. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door, but before I left, I turned to Ava one last time. "You've made your choice, Ava," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "And now I have to make mine." And with that, I walked out of the door, leaving behind the life I thought I knew. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. The past few days had been a slow burn, a creeping realization of the betrayal that had been unfolding right under my nose. But now, as I stood at the door, I knew it was time to confront Ava. There was no running from this anymore. I could feel the weight of the words I was about to say, the words I'd been holding back for so long. and I knew nothing would ever be the same again. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before I opened the door. Inside, the house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that fills a room when something is terribly wrong. Ava was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of coffee, her eyes distant. She didn't hear me at first, and I had a moment to just look at her. The woman I had spent years with, the woman I had trusted completely, was now a stranger. She looked up when she heard my footsteps. There was no shock, no surprise in her expression. It was almost as if she knew this moment was coming. She stood slowly, and for a fleeting moment, I wondered if she would apologize, if she would somehow try to make this right. But deep down, I knew it was too late for apologies. "Ryan, please," she said, her voice small, pleading. But I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't pretend that everything would be fine if we just talked. Not anymore. Not after what I had seen. "Ava," I said, my voice coming out in a low growl, "I don't need you to beg. I need the truth. The whole truth." Her face paled and she took a step back, her hand trembling as she set the mug down. I don't know what you want me to say. I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered, her eyes not meeting mine. "Stop," I interrupted, my heart pounding in my chest. "Don't tell me you didn't want to hurt me. You did this. You chose this." The words tasted bitter in my mouth, but they were the truth, and I needed her to hear it. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the guilt, the shame, but also something else, something more, and that's when I knew. She wasn't sorry. She was sorry she'd been caught, but she wasn't sorry for what she'd done. "I saw the messages, Ava," I said, my voice shaking with anger now. "I saw the pictures. I saw everything. So don't stand there and tell me you didn't want to hurt me. You've been lying to me. You've been lying to our family." Her face crumpled at the mention of the pictures. Her hands, once so steady, were now shaking uncontrollably as she wiped at her face, trying to hide the tears. But there was no escaping the reality of what had happened. "I never meant for it to go this far, Ryan," she said, her voice cracking. I needed someone. I needed something more than what we had." "More than what we had?" My chest tightened at her words, the sting of her betrayal hitting me harder than I thought possible. I had given everything to this woman, my love, my trust, my loyalty, and she had thrown it all away for what? For a fleeting moment with Kyle? For a feeling? "You needed someone?" I repeated, incredulous. "And what about me, Ava? What about the life we built? What about our children? Did you ever think about them, about us? Or was it all about your own needs, your own desires?" She winced at the mention of our kids, and I could see a flicker of guilt in her eyes. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't nearly enough to undo what she had done. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, the tears now flowing freely. "I was lost, Ryan. I was so lost in my own unhappiness. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to talk to you." "Talk to me?" I spat. "You should have talked to me when you first started feeling like this. You should have come to me, not him." My voice broke at the end, and I had to swallow back the anger and heartbreak that rose up in my throat. She stepped forward then, her hands trembling as she reached for me. "I'm sorry," she said softly, the words laced with so much pain that for a second I almost believed her. But then I remembered. I remembered everything. The secrecy, the lies, the way she pulled away from me even when I tried to hold on. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a choice. "I don't think you understand," I said, my voice barely above a whisper now. "This is the end, Ava. I can't forgive you for this. I can't forget what you've done." She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Ryan," she begged, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you. Please don't leave me." I didn't respond right away. I just looked at her, trying to find something, anything, that reminded me of the woman I once loved. But it wasn't there. It was gone. And with that realization, I knew. There was no coming back from this. There was no fixing it. "I'm leaving, Ava," I said, my voice steady but heavy. "I'm done." I turned and walked out, the sound of her sobs fading behind me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't look back. The silence in the house was deafening, louder than any argument, louder than any scream. It was a silence that settled deep within me, like a heavy fog I couldn't escape. The day after I walked out on Ava, after the confrontation, it felt like the world had fractured, leaving only jagged pieces behind. I tried to breathe through it, tried to keep it together for Ethan and Lily, but I felt like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, about to fall, but too tired to move. When I came home, the kids were waiting, sitting quietly at the kitchen table, their small faces full of uncertainty. They didn't know. They couldn't possibly know what was happening. But they could feel it. They could sense that something had shifted, that the world they knew had crumbled in a way they couldn't understand. Ethan, my 10-year-old, was the first to speak. His voice was small, fragile. "Dad, where's Mom?" he asked, his innocent eyes looking up at me with such trust, such hope, that it almost made my heart break all over again. I stood there, unable to answer. How could I explain? How could I tell them that everything they knew was about to change forever? Ava had already taken some things, clothes, a few personal items. I wasn't sure if she had planned to leave for good or if she was still clinging to some hope that this wasn't really happening. I didn't know what she felt anymore. I couldn't know. She had made her choice, and now I had to make mine. "I don't know, buddy," I said, my voice hoarse. I think Mom needed some time." Lily, who was 8, looked up at me with her big brown eyes, her lip quivering slightly. "Will she be back?" she asked, the question so simple and yet so impossible to answer. I swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. How could I promise them something I didn't know myself? How could I tell them that everything would be okay when I didn't believe it myself? "I'm not sure," I said, my voice breaking. "But we're going to be okay, I promise." It was a lie. I wasn't sure if we were going to be okay. I wasn't sure about anything anymore, but they needed to hear it. They needed to feel some semblance of security in a world that was falling apart around them. The next few days were a blur. Ava didn't come back. There were phone calls, angry text messages, long conversations that I couldn't bear to have. She wanted to talk about the kids, wanted to talk about our marriage, but I couldn't find it in myself to listen. All I wanted was to block it all out, to focus on the children, to try to keep things as normal as possible. But nothing felt normal anymore. Nothing would ever be normal again. I started the process of making things official, hiring a lawyer to handle the divorce. The thought of it made me sick to my stomach. I wasn't ready to face this, to admit that my family had fallen apart, that I was now a single father, left to pick up the pieces of a life that I had worked so hard to build. But the paperwork had to be done. The house had to be sold. The finances had to be sorted out. And the kids, the kids, had to be protected. They were the only thing that mattered now. Ava had been distant for so long that I had almost become numb to it. But seeing her leave, seeing her walk away from everything we had, our family, our home, our life together, was a sharp pain that I couldn't ignore. She had chosen him. She had chosen Kyle, my boss, the man I had trusted, over everything we had built. The anger that bubbled up inside me was all-consuming. I couldn't stand the thought of Kyle having what I had worked so hard for, of him stepping into my place. But the worst part was that I didn't even know if Ava felt guilty. She didn't seem to. She didn't seem to care. I remember the night I told the kids. It was after dinner, a quiet evening at home, and I could feel the weight of the words pressing on me. I had to tell them. They had to know the truth. "Ethan, Lily," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Mom and I are getting a divorce." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Ethan's face went pale, his eyes wide with shock, and Lily, sweet, innocent Lily, started crying before I even finished speaking. I pulled them both into my arms, holding them tight, feeling their little bodies tremble with confusion and fear. "I'm sorry, baby," I whispered to Lily as I rocked her back and forth. "I'm so sorry. We'll get through this together, I promise." But I wasn't sure we would. I wasn't sure I would ever get through this. The pain of losing Ava, of losing our family, was more than I could bear. But I had to stay strong for them. I had to. The house was quieter now. The emptiness in the walls, in the rooms where Ava and I had laughed, loved, and dreamed, seemed to echo with the weight of everything that was gone. And as I lay in bed that night, with the weight of the day pressing down on me, I realized something. This was the end of everything I had known. The life I had dreamed of, one where we were a family, where we grew old together, was gone, and I had no idea how to move forward from here. It wasn't supposed to be this way. The life I had worked so hard to build, the family I had sacrificed everything for, it was all slipping through my fingers. I had always thought I could fix things, that somehow I could make this right. But the truth was glaring now. Nothing would ever be the same. Ava had made her choice, and so had I. The anger in me was like an open wound, festering and growing with every passing hour. I kept replaying the images of Ava with Kyle, the conversations I had overheard, the betrayal that ran so deep. But that wasn't enough. I needed something more. I needed to make them feel the consequences of what they had done. I needed to do something. I sat alone in the dim light of the kitchen, the sound of the clock ticking loud in the silence. My mind raced. The hours of sleep I had missed over the last few days, weeks maybe, only made the thoughts sharper, more dangerous. I wasn't a violent man. I never had been. But this was different. I had to protect what was mine, the kids, my life. I had to make sure that Ava and Kyle couldn't just waltz off into their perfect future while I was left to pick up the pieces. They needed to feel the weight of their actions. I hadn't decided yet what I would do, but I had a plan. It started small, quiet. I wasn't about to let my emotions dictate the course of action. No, I needed to be smarter than that. I had always been the responsible one, the steady one. But now, I was the one who would make them regret it. I began by collecting everything I could find, emails, text messages, photos, anything that could serve as proof. I was meticulous. Every screenshot, every note, every slip-up. Nothing was too small. I saved it all. I thought of how Ava had tried to hide the truth from me, how Kyle had laughed in my face, all while I worked tirelessly to make our life together work. It was sickening. But if they thought they could get away with it, they were wrong. As I spent hours sorting through the evidence, a dark satisfaction began to build in my chest. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice, about making sure they didn't think they could just walk away from the mess they'd created. They had taken everything from me, and now it was time to take something from them. But there was a part of me that still hesitated. The kids. They were still so young, so innocent. I didn't want them to suffer through any of this. But how could I protect them from the fallout of their mother's betrayal? I needed to be careful, calculated. I wasn't going to make the same mistakes twice. I had to think about how I would approach the situation, how I would handle Ava without completely losing control. There was so much at stake, and I couldn't afford to be reckless. But the fire inside me burned too hot. I wanted to make Ava feel the way I felt. I wanted her to understand what it meant to betray the one person who loved her. I wanted her to see that the life she thought she could rebuild with Kyle would never be the same. I started making calls. Lawyers, financial experts, people who could help me make the best possible move in this situation. I wasn't going to let them take anything from me. Not the house, not the kids, and certainly not the life I had worked so hard to create. Every step I took, every decision I made felt like a small victory. It was all leading to one moment. The moment when I would present Ava with everything I had learned, everything I had uncovered. She had been hiding from the truth for so long, but I was going to make her face it. I was going to make her understand that there were consequences to her actions. But even as I plotted my next move, a part of me struggled. There was still a small part of me that loved her, that wanted to believe there was some way to salvage what we had, some way to bring her back. But that wasn't realistic, not anymore. So I pushed those feelings aside. I told myself I had no choice. I had to protect what was mine. I had to fight for the future of my children, for the future I had imagined with Ava. I had no idea where this path would lead, but I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't be a victim anymore. I was done. The day of the hearing arrived like a thunderclap, loud, inevitable, and terrifying. I stood in front of the courthouse, my heart racing, not knowing what to expect. I had never been to a courtroom before, not for anything like this. The thought of facing Ava, of fighting for my children in front of a judge, was more than I could handle. But this was my reality now, my life, my family. It was all being torn apart, and I had no choice but to face it head on. I could hear the shuffle of footsteps around me, the murmur of voices, but in that moment, everything felt distant. The people walking by, the flashing lights of the city, the cold air against my skin, they were all just background noise to the storm raging inside me. All I could think about was what was at stake. My kids, the life I wanted to give them, the future that was now uncertain. As I stepped into the courtroom, I felt the weight of the place settle around me. The judge sat at the front, the opposing lawyers already positioned, ready to battle it out. Ava was sitting with her lawyer, Kyle, by her side, looking smug in his expensive suit. I could feel the anger rising in me. How could he stand there with that look on his face? How could he just sit there pretending nothing had changed, pretending that everything would go on as it always had? I turned my attention back to the judge as he called the court to order. His voice echoed through the room, but my thoughts were consumed with the reality of the situation. The only thing that mattered now was the custody of Ethan and Lily. I had to show the court that I was the one who could provide for them, that I was the one who had their best interests at heart. But as I glanced over at Ava, I could see the coldness in her eyes. She wasn't the same woman I had married, and that hurt more than anything else. The hearing started, and I took my seat, trying to steady my breath. Ava's lawyer spoke first, painting me as the irresponsible one, the one who had failed to see the cracks in the marriage, the one who had let things slip. He pointed to my busy schedule, my long hours at work, as if I had chosen my career over my family. It was hard to listen to, knowing that every word they said was a reflection of their twisted version of our story. When it was my turn, I stood slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to do this. I had to fight for my kids. My voice shook as I spoke, but I couldn't let myself falter. I talked about the time I spent with Ethan and Lily, how I was always there for them, how I had taken care of them every day, even when things were falling apart. I didn't mention the anger that simmered beneath the surface, or the pain of watching my family crumble before my eyes. I didn't mention that it felt like my entire world was falling apart around me. I focused on what mattered, the kids. But as I spoke, I couldn't help but notice how Ava was watching me. Her face was a mask of indifference, her eyes cold. She didn't look like the woman I had fallen in love with. She didn't look like the mother of my children. She looked like a stranger. I could feel the weight of it, the finality of it. She had made her choice, and now I was left to pick up the pieces. Kyle's lawyer had a different approach. He tried to paint Ava as the ideal parent, loving, patient, devoted. He told the court about how she had always been there for the kids, how she was the one who made sure they were fed, cared for. But I knew the truth. I knew how distant she had become, how she had pulled away, how she had abandoned our family. The truth was that she wasn't the woman she used to be. She wasn't the mother they deserved. And then came the moment I had been dreading, the moment when the judge asked about our financial situation. I could feel the tension in the room, the pressure mounting. This wasn't just about custody. This was about who would walk away with what, who would be left holding the broken pieces. I tried to focus, tried to keep my mind on the kids, but the fear and anger began to consume me. Kyle's involvement in the case complicated things further. I could see him sitting there, his face an emotionless mask, pretending to be above it all. But I knew better. I knew what he had done. I knew how he had betrayed me. And now he was trying to take my family from me. As the proceedings went on, I felt the weight of the situation settling in. This wasn't just about winning or losing. It was about my children's future. It was about their safety, their stability. And in that moment, I realized that no matter what happened in that courtroom, no matter how the judge ruled, I had to be the one to pick up the pieces. I had to be the one to fight for them, to make sure they knew they were loved, no matter what. The judge called for a short recess, and I stepped outside for a moment to collect myself. My hands were shaking. My heart was racing. The reality of what was happening was sinking in, and it felt like a cold, hard truth I couldn't escape. As I looked out at the city, the overwhelming sense of loss threatened to swallow me whole. But then I thought of Ethan and Lily. I thought of the way they looked at me, the way they depended on me. And in that moment I knew that no matter what, I couldn't give up. I couldn't let them down. It's strange, the way time passes when you're broken. At first, every second feels like a lifetime, dragging on in a blur of pain, regret, and anger. But as the days, weeks, and months passed, I started to notice the small changes. The rawness of the pain began to dull, not disappear, not fade completely, but it became more manageable. It became something I could live with. I woke up one morning, the weight of my life settling on me once again. The legal battles were still ongoing, but I had come to terms with the fact that I couldn't control everything. I couldn't fix everything, no matter how hard I tried. Ethan and Lily, my kids, were the one constant. They were the reason I kept getting out of bed every day. I threw myself into being the best father I could be, despite the chaos that seemed to surround me. They were my light, my anchor, keeping me grounded when everything else felt like it was spinning out of control. I took them to school every morning, helped them with their homework, and read them stories before bed. Sometimes I'd catch them looking at me as if trying to figure out what had happened. Their questions about Mom, about Ava, were always gentle, as if they were trying to shield me from the truth. They didn't understand fully, but they felt the shift. They saw the way I had to pretend everything was okay when it wasn't. The silence in the house was still there, but it wasn't as heavy. I had learned to fill the void with the little things, small victories. A good laugh with Ethan after school, an evening spent watching Lily's favorite movies. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. We were figuring it out. I remember one evening after dinner when Lily looked up at me and asked, "Daddy, when is Mommy coming back?" I had been prepared for this. I had rehearsed the answer in my mind 1,000 times, but when the words finally left my mouth, they didn't come out as I expected. They were quieter, softer. "Mommy's not coming back, sweetheart," I said, "but I'm here. I'll always be here for you." She didn't cry. Instead, she just nodded, like she understood in a way I didn't think she would. Ethan, who had been quiet up until that point, took her hand and gave me a small, solemn nod, too. It was the first time in a long while that I felt like we were truly a family again, even if it wasn't the family I had hoped for. The next few months were a blur of routine and slow healing. I focused on the kids, on rebuilding our life. But something inside me had shifted. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the same way. The anger had been replaced by something else, something quieter, more peaceful. It was as though I had finally come to terms with the fact that I couldn't change the past, no matter how much I wanted to. All I could do now was move forward. I started seeing a therapist, someone who helped me work through the emotions I hadn't allowed myself to feel. At first, it felt like I was wasting my time. But gradually, the walls I had built around myself began to come down. I began to understand that healing wasn't about forgetting what had happened. It was about learning to live with it, to carry it with me without letting it define me. Ava, in all her absence, didn't seem to be a part of my world anymore. I had expected the pain of losing her to linger, but it didn't. It still hurt, but I was no longer consumed by it. The resentment I had held on to for so long slowly faded, replaced by a strange sense of relief. She had made her choices, and they had led her away from me. I couldn't keep fighting that fight anymore. It wasn't worth it. I found peace in the small moments. Watching Ethan grow into a thoughtful, intelligent young man, watching Lily's eyes light up as she learned something new. I found peace in knowing that despite everything that had happened, I was still standing. I was still their father. I could still give them everything I had. And then one day, as if by some unspoken agreement, the phone call came. It was Ava. She wanted to talk. She wanted to see the kids. I wasn't sure I was ready, but I knew I had to be. I couldn't keep holding on to the past forever. The conversation was short, awkward, and filled with tension. Ava asked about the kids, about their lives, about how they were adjusting. She sounded different, almost distant, as though the woman I had once known had faded completely. She apologized for everything, but it was empty. I could hear the sincerity in her voice, but I wasn't sure it mattered anymore. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean for it to get this far." The words didn't sting like they once would have. They didn't change anything. But for the first time, I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I just felt nothing. It was a strange, freeing feeling. "I know," I said, my voice steady, "but I think it's time we let go, Ava, for all our sakes." She didn't respond. I don't know if she understood, but in that moment I realized that I had moved on. I had finally started healing, and for the first time in a long time I felt like I was in control again. It's funny how life moves forward, even when you're not ready. I wasn't expecting to find love again. I wasn't looking for it. The scars from Ava's betrayal were still fresh, and the weight of everything that had happened pressed down on me like a constant reminder. But sometimes, when you least expect it, life gives you a chance, a second chance. And sometimes, you don't even realize it's happening until it's too late. Her name was Emma. I met her one evening, weeks after the divorce was finalized, when I decided to step outside my shell for the first time in months. A friend had invited me to a local coffee shop for a casual get-together, and I almost didn't go. It felt like too much, too soon. But something in me pushed me forward. I went. And there she was. She wasn't anything like Ava. There were no sparks of intensity, no overwhelming chemistry, just a quiet, steady presence that somehow made me feel safe. She wasn't looking for anything either, she told me, just trying to keep moving, to rebuild her own life after a series of failed relationships. We didn't talk about the past much. We didn't need to. It was clear that we were both trying to find our footing again. At first, it was easy. Emma wasn't like the others I had met. She didn't have baggage that I could see. She didn't bring up the past. She didn't ask probing questions about my failed marriage. She listened when I talked, but she didn't push me to explain myself. She respected the spaces I kept for myself, and slowly, over time, I found myself opening up to her. Not about Ava, not about the betrayal, but about who I had become since then. I began to let myself believe in the possibility of something new, something that wasn't tied to the past, something that felt like it could be real. It wasn't easy. I was still haunted by memories, by the moments when I was left alone, by the pain of watching my children cry as their world shifted in ways they couldn't understand. But with Emma, there was a gentleness that I hadn't realized I was missing. Our dates were simple at first. Dinner, movies, quiet walks through the park with no agenda other than enjoying the moment. But every time I was with her, I felt a piece of me healing. Emma had a way of making me laugh, of making me forget about everything that had been broken. It wasn't about rushing into something new. It wasn't about erasing what had happened. It was about learning to breathe again. But it wasn't without challenges. As much as I wanted to embrace this new chapter in my life, there were moments when doubts crept in. What if I was just using Emma to fill the hole that Ava had left? What if I was rushing into something that wasn't meant to be? I had learned the hard way that not everything that feels good is right. I couldn't afford to make the same mistake again. And then there were the kids. Ethan and Lily had started to adjust to the new normal, but the idea of introducing Emma into their lives was a different kind of challenge. They had already been through so much. They had already seen the destruction of a family they thought would last forever. What would they think of Emma? How would they feel about me moving on? I wasn't sure how to navigate that. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about them, and I knew that no matter how much I wanted this new relationship to work, it couldn't come at the expense of my kids. They had to come first. The conversation with Ethan was the hardest. He had been quiet for a while, as if he had been waiting for me to bring it up. One evening after dinner, he asked, "Dad, are you seeing someone? Is she going to be part of our lives now?" The question caught me off guard. My heart sank because I knew this was coming. I had to face it. I sat down next to him, taking a deep breath. "Yes, I'm seeing someone, buddy. Her name is Emma." I watched his face closely, looking for any sign of discomfort, of resistance. "But I want you to know nothing is going to change. You and Lily are still my #1 priority. No one will ever replace your mom." He nodded slowly, but I could see the hesitation in his eyes. "Is she nice?" "She is," I said, a small smile tugging at the corners of my lips. "She's really nice. But I want you to take your time getting to know her, okay? No rush." Ethan seemed to accept that, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't going to be as hard as I thought. As for Lily, she had her own way of processing things. She didn't ask as many questions, but I could see her observing everything. Her eyes were always watching, always taking in the world around her. But she was adjusting too. She was learning that life didn't always follow the script we expected. She was learning that people and families could change, and sometimes that wasn't a bad thing. It was hard. It was messy. But it was also beautiful in its own way. I had learned that love didn't have to come in the form of perfection. It didn't have to be grand or flawless. Sometimes love was found in the quiet moments, in the laughter shared over dinner, in the companionship that grows over time, slowly but steadily. And for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. I felt like I was on the right path, even if it was a winding one. Moving on from the past didn't mean forgetting it. It didn't mean erasing the hurt. It meant finding a way to live again, to love again. With Emma by my side and my children at the center of it all, I finally felt like I had something to look forward to. Maybe not everything had been lost after all. The road to recovery isn't a straight line. It's jagged, full of twists and turns that you never see coming, even when you think you've got it all figured out. In the months following my separation from Ava, I had convinced myself that I was done with the past, that the worst was over. But life has a way of reminding you that stability isn't something you can take for granted, not even after the dust seems to settle. Ethan and Lily were adjusting. I could see it in the way they moved through our new routine, quietly, cautiously, like they were still waiting for something to explode. I didn't blame them. I had watched their world shatter before their eyes. They had seen the man they trusted, their father, dissolve into something broken and unrecognizable. They didn't know how to trust that things would stay calm. I kept up the facade, the strength I thought I had to display for them. I smiled when they smiled, laughed when they laughed, and gave them the stability they needed. But behind closed doors, the cracks were still there. I wasn't whole yet, not by a long shot. I'd done my best to put everything back together, but I couldn't erase the sting of the past. The scars on my heart were there, like permanent marks that reminded me of how fragile life had become. Emma had been a constant. Slowly, quietly, she had become a part of our lives, without fanfare, without expectations. She never pushed me to feel anything I wasn't ready for. She didn't ask for more than I could give, and for the first time in months, I began to feel like I could breathe again. But stability wasn't just about having someone by your side. It wasn't about pretending the pain didn't exist. It was about finding peace within yourself, accepting that the world you had once known wasn't the world you lived in anymore. I still had my work to focus on. I threw myself into it, building up my business, reestablishing myself as the person I had been before everything collapsed. It was hard at first. My focus wasn't as sharp as it used to be. But little by little, as the days passed, I began to find my rhythm again. I found purpose in the work I did. In helping clients, in solving problems, I regained pieces of myself I thought I'd lost forever. The legal battles, the questions of custody, the constant fight to prove I could be a good father, those things were behind me for the most part. I had won what I'd set out to achieve. Joint custody. I was still in their lives. I still mattered. But there were moments, like when I had to drop them off at Ava's, that I was reminded that no matter how much stability I found, there would always be a hole in my life, a void that couldn't be filled, not completely. I started to think about the future differently. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to imagine a life beyond the pain, beyond the heartache. I thought about the possibility of building a future with Emma, one where the past didn't hold us hostage, where the shadows of Ava's betrayal didn't lurk over our every decision. I wasn't sure where it would lead, but I was willing to try. I was willing to take that step. But just as I began to feel the weight of the past lifting, it hit me. It wasn't just about me, it wasn't just about my happiness, it was about the kids. And I had to ask myself, how would they feel about this new version of our family? Would they accept Emma? Would they understand that despite everything that had happened, I was trying to build something new, something better for us all? Ethan and Lily didn't ask for this. They didn't ask for their parents to split up, for their world to be turned upside down. They had been through enough, and I knew that introducing Emma into the mix too soon could complicate things in ways I wasn't prepared for. So I took it slow. I let things unfold naturally, allowing the bond between Emma and my children to grow at its own pace. I didn't push, I didn't rush. I let them see her as who she was, someone who cared, someone who was patient. Emma never once tried to replace Ava. She didn't force her way into their lives. She just showed up, quietly, with a kindness that seemed to be enough. And slowly, over time, the walls they had built started to crumble. In the stillness of the evenings, after the kids had gone to bed, I would sit with Emma and let my guard down. I let myself be vulnerable for the first time in so long. We didn't talk about the past much. There was no need. We both knew where we had been, what we had come from. But there was something comforting about being with her, about knowing that she saw me, really saw me, without judgment, without baggage. Regaining stability didn't mean forgetting what had happened. It didn't mean erasing the pain or pretending like everything was fine. It meant learning to move forward, one step at a time, even when the past still lingered in the corners of your mind. It meant being honest with yourself and with the people who mattered. It meant accepting that life wasn't perfect. It wasn't supposed to be. And maybe, just maybe, that was the lesson I needed to learn. It's strange the way peace can creep into your life when you least expect it. For so long, everything had felt like chaos, like the universe was pulling apart at the seams, and no matter what I did, I couldn't stitch it all back together. But time has a way of smoothing rough edges, of softening even the hardest pain. I never thought I'd reach a point where I felt calm again. But I did. It started with the kids. Ethan, who had once seemed so distant, now made an effort to open up to me more. He would sit with me on the porch some evenings, talking about school, his friends, his hopes for the future. It was a small thing, but it meant the world to me. I had feared that the fracture in our family would create a permanent distance between us, that the bond we had built would shatter along with everything else. But somehow, it was becoming stronger, more real, now that we were no longer pretending to be something we weren't. Lily, too, had begun to thrive in her own way. She wasn't the scared, uncertain child she had been after everything fell apart. She was curious again, bright. She would ask about things, about life and the world around her, questions that felt so innocent, so full of promise. I could see her growing, and it was a reminder that despite the pain, life still went on. It still had moments of joy, moments of hope, and I knew now for sure that I couldn't lose that. Not for myself, and certainly not for them. And then there was Emma. She had been a constant, steady presence through everything, and as much as I had tried to push away the idea of building a new life, she had slowly helped me find the courage to do so. We had taken things slowly, one step at a time. There was no rush, no pressure. I didn't need a whirlwind romance. What I needed was someone who understood that healing took time, who didn't try to fix everything but simply walked beside me as I did it myself. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Emma and I sat on the couch, the soft glow of the lamp casting a warm light over the room. She turned to me, her eyes soft but steady. "How are you doing?" she asked, her voice gentle but full of concern. I hesitated, letting the weight of the question sink in. I hadn't asked myself that in a long time. I think I'm finally okay," I said quietly. The words felt foreign, strange even, but true. I had lived for so long in a state of fear, of anger, of constant turmoil. But somehow, with time, I had come to terms with everything, with what I had lost and what I had gained. Emma smiled, a quiet smile, one that said more than words ever could. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for," she said softly. It wasn't the first time she had said something like that, but this time it landed differently. It felt real. In the months that followed, things began to settle into a new rhythm. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't need to be. Perfection had never been the goal. Stability, love, peace, that's what I needed. And slowly I found it. There were moments when I would think back on the life I had with Ava. There were still scars, still wounds that hadn't fully healed. But the anger, the resentment had faded. They no longer had a hold on me. I had learned that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, but it meant freeing myself from the grip of bitterness. Ava had made her choices, and I had made mine. What was left was the life I had now, the family I was rebuilding. The legal battles were over. Custody arrangements were settled, and I had found a sense of peace in knowing that no matter what, my children would always be a part of my life. The financial worries, the doubts about the future, they had quieted, replaced by a sense of purpose. I had a direction now. I was no longer looking backward. I was looking forward. I remember the day we took a trip to the beach, a simple, peaceful day with just the four of us, Ethan, Lily, Emma, and me. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the water, and as we sat together on the sand, watching the waves roll in, I realized something. I had survived. I had come through the storm, and while the road had been long and difficult, I was finally at a place of peace. I could see the beauty in the world again. I could see the promise of the future. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. It wasn't just about the kids. It wasn't just about Emma. It was about me, about finding myself again, about rebuilding something that I thought had been lost forever. I looked at the faces of the people I loved, my children, Emma, and I knew, with every fiber of my being, that this was where I was meant to be. Not in the past, not in the wreckage of what was lost, but in the quiet moments, in the present, with those who mattered most. Life had given me a second chance, and I was finally ready to embrace it. What do you think of the character's journey and transformation? From which region are you watching this video? Make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you can follow all our stories. And don't forget to check out more heartwarming tales by clicking here on the end screen.